now he'll have a battle for the steering wheel, and within a year to 2 years, this 13 MPs won't look as unbridled a source of joy as it looks right now. But it's a big dilemma for the Conservative Party, clearly, and for Labour.
It's just me clapping. It's just me clapping, but it's so good. Well done. The best, by far and away, the best version of the theme tune so far. Yes, it's How to Win an Election, live on election night on Times Radio and the Times Radio YouTube channel. Danny Finkelstein, Tory Brainbox is in the studio. Hello, Danny.
Hello.
Polly Mackenzie, Policy Mackenzie, former Director of Policy for Nick Clegg's beaming in. Hello, Polly.
Hello, Matt.
And I imagine Peter is just singing Make a Change wherever he is. Peter, where are you?
I'm at the BBC.
Don't say that. Just say you're in a giddy state. Let's get this out of the way with first of all, then, Peter. What do you think?
What do I think? I think it is a miracle. I think it's a miracle because it's never happened before, because no party so far behind has ever overtaken such an electoral deficit and climbed so far up such a steep cliff edge as Starmer's Labour Party has just done. No party has, as we have done, gone backwards in 2019, backwards in 2015, having lost power in 2010, and then just in 2024 catapulted into this extraordinary landslide victory. I mean, let's assume that the exit poll is out by, a few, but even so, it's an extraordinary result. And needless to say, I am an extremely happy boy.
Well, that's lovely. Danny?
Oh, I think you have to congratulate the Conservative Party because it's worked really hard at doing this, at getting only 131 MP. It's worked for 5 years relentlessly on making sure that almost nobody wanted to vote for it, and people then distributed in all different directions. I mean, we've been saying this obviously on the podcast from the beginning. This is you couldn't unhave Liz Truss, you couldn't unhave the parties, you couldn't unhave the poor economic position, you couldn't unhave being in power for 14 years, and therefore you couldn't unhave the result. I think a lot of Conservatives will be quite relieved that they remain likely to be the main party of opposition. And interesting that Reform is got projected to have 13 seats. Tonight that'll be a cause of great joy in Reform UK headquarters, but it's 12 more MPs than Nigel Farage really wants, because now he'll have a battle for the steering wheel, and within a year to 2 years, this 13 MPs won't look as unbridled a source of joy as it looks right now. But it's a big dilemma for the Conservative Party, clearly, and for Labour. Weirdly, on this big night,
because it does look like some of these gains are coming from Labour seats.
On this big night, it's just something for Labour to pay some attention to. But essentially, the big rule of politics, which is if you move towards the centre, and by that I mean also competence as well, because that's sort of partly about realism and ideology. You win elections, and that Labour Party drifted away and lost an election, and it came back and it won an election. It's the oldest story, and if the Conservative Party doesn't pay attention to that, it'll lose again next time.
So the exit poll: Labour 410 seats, Conservatives 131, the Lib Dems 61. Polly, there's only one fewer than Charles Kennedy in 2005. The Lib Dems are back.
Well, I mean, assuming that it actually pans out that way, it will be a transformation, certainly, of the Liberal Democrat representation in Parliament. And I think, the bigger point is, as Danny says, right, like Reform is going to be there in some numbers. The Conservative Party is still probably going to be, by some margin, the main opposition party, but so much more complicated apart on the opposition benches, that you could have this dramatic result for the Liberal Democrats and Labour sort of still not quite reaching the majority that Blair had. So I think the future of what opposition to this Labour government will look like, where that will go, is going to be a really interesting thing that plays out over the next 5 years. Will the Liberal Democrats attack from the left or from the right? Will the Conservative Party seek to absorb those 13 Reform MPs and pull themselves over to the right, or will they try and reclaim the centre ground? The amount of kind of complexity and jostling on those opposition benches is going to be fascinating. Obviously, still less important than what the government does to try and, maybe grow the economy and fix the NHS. But nevertheless, I think will attract a lot of political attention.
We've actually just got in Nigel Farage's reaction to that exit poll suggesting Reform UK could win 13 seats. Let's take a listen.
We'll see what happens. If that's the result, that would be a massive first step for this, and I'm going to call it a movement. The political party is only a part of what we're all about. This is a movement to represent ordinary folk, the silent majority. So look, that looks to me to be very good news. Thanks all for being here. Let's enjoy the evening. Thank you.
How worried should Labour be about this, do you think, Peter?
About Nigel Farage?
About Nigel Farage and 30... Because it does look, on some of the breakdown of these exit polls, it looks like, aside from the Lee Anderson and the seat in Clacton, a lot of these gains, these 13 MPs reform, are coming at the expense of what were sitting Labour MPs.
Well, I can't comment on that because I simply don't know. We don't know yet. We don't know the results. But look, Nigel Farage, he's not leading a movement in the country, but he's definitely putting himself at the head of an insurgency, no question about that. And both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have got to reflect very strongly about this and why people are protesting and going to Farage, who didn't offer a programme, a manifesto. He offered just a collection of slogans with no solutions to the country's problems. And we've got to ask ourselves very seriously why this is happening. Now, obviously, the immediate question of reform success will be for the Conservative Party, the Conservative politicians, face a choice. Do they fight for the best traditions of their party, or do they capitulate to Farage and to Reform UK? And they have to decide. I mean, half of them during this election campaign seem to have wanted to fight reform, while the other half have seemed to want to become reform. And so there's going to emerge in the Conservative Party quite a serious schism between those two wings, those two schools of thought. And certainly, for my money, the future of British politics and the future of good government, because it requires a sensible, sober, responsible opposition. For my money, the future of British politics relies on the Conservative Party making the right decision, the right choice to fight reform, to fight Farage, and to restore those traditions, those values, and that centrist outlook to their own Conservative Party.
Have you got the bell, Matt? Even though it's election night.
I have.
Okay, so I think we should use this every time someone starts talking about the Tories and the right. The Labour Party has won 410 seats, if the exit poll is correct. Maybe it's 400, maybe it's 420. In other words, it's a massive Labour landslide and a completely new political settlement. And that is, for political reporters and analysts, very exciting. For the country, very new. There's a lot we don't know about the people that are coming in. There's a lot of new things that are going to happen. These old arguments between James Cleverly and, Richard Tice and Mark Francois are old arguments. And yes, the Conservative Party has got to solve these problems. I would say that the Tories have won plenty of majorities without having Bassett law, and they've never won any without having Surrey Heath. And that would be my position in it. But truthfully, the debate ought to be about Labour. The thought ought to be about how Keir Starmer won this huge majority. The concentration ought to be on its election gurus, the Morgan McSweeney's, and not just about the Tory rows.
Let me just interrupt you, Danny, because we've got our first
Result.
We're going live to Sunderland.
68. The number of rejected ballot papers was 101. The turnout was 51.2%, and that Bridget May Phillipson has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
So that's Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, re-elected in Hooton and Sunderland South. We try to read the constituency there. So they obviously won the race. They won the race to do the count first, and very important race that people in the North East seem to take very seriously. No great surprise that Bridget Phillipson is back, but you know it's good to have actually have a result, and I'm sure James Johnson's feeding that into his model right now to work out what that means, and we can extrapolate wildly from that for hours to come. Polly, what difference do you think it'll make to the Labour Party having a big chunk of Lib Dems in the Commons? It's sort of interesting, actually. I was just sort of thinking, having had the SNP for so long, there, and Ed Davey actually struggling to punch through until he went on a roller coaster. Nigel Farage will suddenly find he's in that position, having a question at PMQs once every 6 months and all that sort of thing. What difference will it make to the Labour Party having a strong centre-left chunk of MPs opposite?
I think, well, I mean, we don't know how the Liberal Democrats will choose to kind of evolve in this new parliament. Danny is always reminding us we should think about what will be the character of this big cohort of new Labour MPs. What are their personal views and passions, and how will that affect the sort of tribes within the Labour Party? The same will be true of the Lib Dems, right? Because 61, a group of 61 is a completely different beast to manage. And so where will they go in terms of Europe, in terms of the economy, in terms of public services? I think we have to recognise that we don't quite know how that will pan out. But the most important thing for Keir Starmer is the fact that he will have a really big majority. And perhaps this majority isn't quite as high as some of the more kind of apocalyptic predictions in which the Conservative Party was completely obliterated, but it's still pretty big, right? And that will enable them to go into government with confidence. And actually, for the first couple of years, there's almost nothing that happens on the opposition benches, which will really be able to dent that confidence, I think. And so that Danny's right, actually thinking about how the Labour Party will choose to govern is going to be really important. It will require our political media to focus more on policy than on politics, but that would make me happy, so that'd be nice.
They don't call you Policy Mackenzie for nothing.
Well, no, I'm really just trying to get a job or something, aren't I?
Well, luckily, Peter, the Labour Party have got so many policies which they laid out in such specific detail before the election.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that Polly keeps on reminding us that the projected majority for Keir Starmer is not as great as the 1997 majority, which we won under Tony Blair after that tremendous campaign. Thank you, Polly. Keep going with that.
So you say you're,
I love you, Peter.
You're still better than Keir Starmer with Morgan McSweeney. Is that what you're saying, Peter?
No. I think they are extraordinary magicians of a most superior kind, and I love them both. What they've done is just tremendous, and they will just deserve every single piece of credit they get.
I mean, the interesting actually, Peter, I should point out that based on this, if this is what pans out, Labour will have gained 208 seats based on compared to 2019, whereas you gained 147 in 1997.
Oh, look, let's not confuse it with all these figures. Matt, really. We know a victory when we see.
Can I ask Peter this question, which is your genuine assessment as to because now we've got past the hump of the election itself, of the positioning of the Labour Party now under Keir Starmer, because it isn't quite the same as the position of Tony Blair. I realised I once went to a dinner with Tony Blair where I was afterwards I said to somebody, he was Shadow Home Secretary at the time, and I said, all he did was agree with all the people round the table who were Tories, and he disagreed. The only person who disagreed with round the table was Polly Toynbee of The Guardian. And I said, he just wants the Tories to agree with him. And later I realised he actually did agree with all those people. That was what his genuine politics were. They aren't.
Well, Danny,
they aren't Keir's, are they? So what can we expect now?
Danny, I wasn't at the dinner party, and I cannot.
Lunch. It was lunch. He insists on lunch because he went home to his children. That's what he said.
Yes,
he said lunch.
He does. He's a 6 o'clock break man. But I wasn't at the lunch, so I don't know what the Tories said, and I don't know what Tony was agreeing with. But you're right. I mean, Tony regarded himself as an arch centrist, absolutely right. Somebody who approached politics, as it were, from the left values or principles and perspective, but very much in the centre. And he didn't want to repudiate Thatcher. He wanted to go beyond Thatcher. Now, all that sort of ancient history. The question is, what sort of politics does Keir Starmer have? And I would say that without his being, identical to Blair, identical to New Labour, he is the nearest thing to New Labour we've seen since Blair. That's how I would describe him. I think that it is true that Labour's manifesto didn't answer every question, and I think it has wisely suggested a number of reviews in different policy areas where they can do more thinking, consult more people, take more views and facts and analysis into account, whether it be to do with defence or the pensions and savings sector and its future, and how we deliver that sort of liquidity into fresh investment in our economy, whether it be to do with sentencing policy, or in Angela Rayner's area, they've committed to consulting on labour market changes. So I think all that's good, but the manifesto, in my view, does give enough insight to know how these key policy questions are going to be answered. They are not Corbynista, they're not entirely New Labour, but as I say, they are going to find practical, consensual, centrist policy solutions to some of the most fantastically complex and intractable policy challenges that we have faced for over a generation.
Can I sort of agree with that? But I actually think what's really exciting about Labour is not really the what of policy making, but the how. This talk about mission-led government and these thinking about, say, participatory mechanisms of policy design and the role of citizens, the role of collaboration between the third sector, the private sector and the state behind kind of shared goals and vision for the country. There's a great essay by James Plunkett in some journal I've never heard of called Renewal recently that really sets that out in granular detail. And so I actually think there is some genuinely radical imagination in Labour's approach to policy making, which is quite different to the sort of the specific policy things about like, oh, you'll get extra appointments or whatever it might be. And assuming that pans out and assuming Labour is able to really convert that into a delivery model in partnership with the civil service, that's a big if. But if they can do that, then we actually might be able to deal with some of those intractable problems that Peter's describing. But it's not about this is the solution. It's about a different approach that one great essayist, namely me, has called humble policymaking. So if you want to think about this deeply overnight before the results come in, you should read about humble policymaking.
There we are, some bedtime reading for you. Peter Dowan, eagle-eared listener, Dowan's been in touch saying, why does Lord Mandelson say that Keir Starmer is the most New Labour leader since Blair? Was Gordon Brown not New Labour?
My theory. I've got a theory about that.
Sorry about that slip.
No, I've got a theory about that, Peter. So my theory is that Gordon Brown remained absolutely true to the New Labour that he and Tony Blair developed after visiting and seeing Bill Clinton. They were really Progressive Policy Institute, New Labour. They had and Gordon Brown stayed rigidly true to that. Tony Blair began to evolve and began to think that wasn't enough and they had to do more. And I think the answer really to your question is that Tony Blair moved away from New Labour towards the end of his period. I mean, more towards me and further from Gordon Brown.
Yeah, no, I'm very familiar with that Ed Balls theory. I've heard it rehearsed on many occasions, and I don't accept it. I don't think that Tony reinterpreted Bill Clinton and sort of moved off in some neoliberal Thatcherite direction.
No, I don't say that either. That's too much.
And left Paul, Gordon Brown, and the rest of the Labour Party behind him. No, I don't accept that. But what I do think is that Tony Blair was very eager to think out of the box, to just imagine how in the 21st century we were going to find new ways of conducting policy, of reforming public services, and doing things differently than we had done them in the previous century. And I think that instinct was right, and I don't think it put him on the left or the right necessarily. I think it just made him modern and in many respects more radical than Gordon Brown.
If you are just joining us here on Times Radio on the Times Radio YouTube channel, we are off and running. We have had one result. Labour have held Houghton in Sunderland.
Houghton.
Houghton. Is it Houghton?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. So that's Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary. So if you go online to thetimes.com, there is a live tracker there with all of the parties and all the numbers. It's just the one so far, but we have at least got one result. Danny, what happens, do you think, to the Tory party in terms of personnel? Who do you think? We spoke to William Hague earlier, and I asked him what would be your advice to someone, as he did. You talked on the podcast, I think, last week, about being there with him when the exit poll dropped and him realising he was going to end up running. And I asked, what's your advice to someone right now thinking about throwing their hat in the ring? And he said, don't do it.
Right, well, it's interesting. So, first of all, ping the bell because we're talking about the Tories, and one of the things that I would say to every Conservative is that the right thing to do is to actually give a bit of thought to the result. They're complicated. Where reform has won is. It is a particular places in the country. The Conservative Party needs to think not only what coalition can it create, but also what coalition does it want to create, and whether or not winning those votes is indeed uniting the right or uniting something else, actually. And so the first thing I would say is give a bit of thought to that before thinking about whether or not to run. But I realise people don't work like that. And I think that a few people will know that they're going to run. They'll be looking at what happens to one or two of their colleagues. At 131, if that does turn out to be the position, I think most of the major people who've been associated with running probably do hold their seats. It was a bit more of a roulette wheel at 60 or 70 seats, which is what some projections were suggesting. So we'll have to see. But my advice to them at this point would be give some clear thought to it. This job's only worth doing if you've got a clear thought about how you're going to win power. And in my view, the big fact of this evening is Labour won the general election. Yes, Reform got some seats in Bassett Law. Yes, the Tories split. Labour won the general election. In other words, Keir Starmer took his party, moved it towards competence, fitness to govern, and won a landslide. That's the big story of this. And I would say think about that.
On the subject of who might not still be there, it looks like Jeremy Hunt, Grant Shapps, Johnny Mercer, Lucy Fraser, and Alex Chalk, all cabinet ministers, who may well have lost their seats. We'll keep across that as it unfolds. Polly, do you think in the end all of Ed Davies' stunts worked?
Well, as you said, the challenge when you're a very small party is to get any kind of cut through. I think the stunts secured media attention, brought some joy to the campaign, and therefore some contrast. The thing that really cut through, I think, for lots of people was Ed's personal story and his reflection that he is anything but unique in his own personal relationship with care and caring. And I think, Ed gave me my first ever job in politics, so I have huge affection for him. And as a human, really. You know, he has character and judgment, and he could have, after being in government, he could have just gone off and made like real money to look after his family in the energy sector, and actually he was drawn back into public service and public life. And I think it's great that politics is making space for somebody like him.
That's nice.
I'm going to stick my head out and say that I think that Starmer and Davey are going to work together. I know they're not in the same party. They're not in the
Might
same
they
government.
go water skiing together? I would pay to see that.
Do you think we might see what Tony Blair and Paddy Ashdown imagined in '97 but never pulled off?
I hope so.
I
hope so, because I think that we missed a trick after '97. We should have persisted with what we started. I'm not sort of advertising any great initiative. I've not got any inside knowledge about this, but I know that Keir Starmer likes and rates Ed Davey. I know they share a fairly common outlook about many things, and I think that, not least because of the size of Labour's majority, Keir Starmer will want to go the extra mile to consult and to involve and to run an inclusive administration.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Well, we can unpick all this when we're back 11 o'clock a.m. tomorrow morning, live in front of a live studio audience, in an idea that seemed much more sensible about 6 weeks ago. Peter, I thought it was a special treat, though. We've been doing this now since October. You kept telling us that Keir Starmer really did know what he was doing. Would you like the Meet the Challenge, Make the Change from 1986?
Yeah!
God.
Is he singing? He's not singing. Well, if he's not going to sing, we'll have the Lib Dem choir instead, shall we, Polly? Right, let's turn that off. I won't inflict Mike back on you again, Danny. Danny Finkelstein, Polly Mackenzie, Peter Mandelson, thank you for joining us for a special edition of How to Win an Election live. We will do it again, say at 11 a.m. on Friday morning. So good. Members of the Hackney Colliery Band joining us live on Times Radio. How to Win an Election, wherever you get your podcasts from.